Welcome to the Wealthy Artist Podcast. And I'm your host, Sarah Clanton.
And I'm Wilson Harwood, and we're talking about how to develop your wealth,
enjoy financial freedom,
enjoy artistic freedom,
and live the life you've always imagined.
All right, what is up, wealthy artists? Thank you so much for joining us today. I am riding solo. Sarah is out and about enjoying her life, traveling the world as a wealthy artist, and I'm here to teach you guys today about how to set up a retirement account and to talk about investing in general a little bit. My goal, I love investing. I love money. I love helping people, and I love teaching people about it. So if you are a total beginner, or if you're even advanced and you've been investing for years, I'm sure you're going to learn something super valuable or relearn something, which is always great to reinforce some great habits around investing. Today in particular, we're going to talk about setting up a retirement account. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, something I value so much. And I've talked to many artists over the years who have neglected to even start a retirement account. Maybe they have a savings account, but they're not actively investing money for their future in the stock market. And that is something that you cannot do for very long. And we'll talk about that more today. So this is a nitty-gritty how-to, direct to the point episode. You will gain actual actionable steps today in how to set up your retirement account. So if you're listening to this podcast on Monday, I hope by next Monday you have a retirement account set up and you are actively investing. That is what I want this episode to do for you. So let's jump in. So the first thing I want to say is a disclaimer that I am not your advisor. I am here for general information. When we talk about money like this, it gets a little bit dicey legally. So I am putting out this disclaimer right off the bat that I have not seen your investment account. I have not taken into account your individual needs, and I'm not a licensed investing specialist by any means, but I have done a ton of research and have invested for over a decade myself. So I just want you to know that off the bat that this is not to be taken as personal advice, but general investing knowledge. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the reasons why you need to invest. I think a lot of people maybe are afraid or think it's too complicated or think only rich people invest, but you're a wealthy artist. You will not be a wealthy artist if you do not start investing in the stock market. So that blanket statement, it's just a must. And if you do real estate on top of it, that's great. But I truly believe you should do real estate, have a Roth IRA, or a 401k if you work for a company as well. It's just part of growing your wealth. So let's talk about the first thing is to beat inflation. Inflation is real. It roughly comes at around between 2 and 3% a year, which means that if you have money sitting in a savings account, it is technically losing 2 to 3% of its value every year. Now, what that means is that the dollar inflation is essentially saying that if you have $1, you can buy so much right now, but in 5 years, that same dollar will buy less goods or services. Products. So if you have let's say you have $500 in a savings account and you're like, oh, this is awesome, $500, I can take a trip to Disneyland. In 10 years, that $500 will not get you a trip to Disneyland. Maybe you'll buy half of a plane flight or something. So that's just a silly example, but I hope it gives you an idea of how inflation works. And the most important point is that you are losing money by leaving money in a savings account. I know that sounds crazy, but it is technically depreciating in value. Just like a car, when you buy it and you drive it off the lot, it starts depreciating in value because it's no longer worth the same amount. Your money does the same thing when it's not being invested. So that is an incredibly important point, is why we invest in the first place. The second reason to invest is that you will make your money work for you. You will get money growing for you while you are sleeping, which I just love that idea. It's a wonderful idea, but it's true. You will gain money over the long term. You will make tons of money by literally doing nothing. And that is an incredible, incredible thing. The third reason is to invest for your retirement. When you want to retire, and all of you wealthy artists should want to retire, I don't want to hear the thing like, oh, I'll just play music forever. It's like when you're 75 and you have health problems and you're too sick and old to get on the road and play music, you're going to really want that retirement account. Or if you're 75 or 65 and you just want to travel the world and take a break from music finally, that's a wonderful thing that you should be able to do as well. So just because we are artists and entrepreneurs does not mean we don't get to retire. That's crazy. So you must have a retirement account. It is just a fact of life, and it will be so amazing when you get to retirement age and you can just start pulling out money that you earned and deserve. So the first thing that is super important to realize with investing in general is this idea of compound interest. Many of you may have heard of this, but I'm going to go over this again in detail because this is the real crux. I've heard Einstein, I don't know if this is true, but he has a quote that's saying compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And the reason is what I'm about to show you mathematically in a second of how it works. So if you start investing, let's say you're 22 years old, you just got out of college. Let's say somehow miraculously you have 10 grand. It doesn't matter if you don't have 10 grand, but for this example, let's say you have $10,000 that you have saved up or your parents gave you, or maybe you in your first year, you can put away $10,000. If you invest that amount into an investment account, getting 7% interest. So just think of interest as like an interest payment on your car, but now you're getting the interest. You gain that annual 7% interest. 7 is a fairly reasonable rate in the investment world. It's a little high, 5% would be really safe, but we're going to say 7%, but we're not going to say something crazy like 12%. That's somewhat unrealistic over the long term. So 7% is what we're going to get every single year. And if you invest for 43 years, which is 22 to 65, and you put in $500 a month, and $500 a month is the maximum you can put in a Roth IRA. It's not a ton of money. It's also not a little bit amount of money. But if you put in every month, every time you work $500 away from 22 to 65, you will have $1,670,102.53 to the penny. And if you want to do this on your own, I highly recommend typing in compound interest calculator. I did this on the U.S. government calculator. Our government has encouraged us to invest by giving us this calculator. So check that out. It's really fun to play with. Now, just for comparison, if you wait till you are 40 years old to start investing that same amount, let's say you're 40 years old, you've only had a savings account your whole life, you decide to take $10,000, put it into investing, and you're getting the same thing, 7%, but now you only have a couple years left, just 40 to 65 relative to that 43 years that you had when you started at 22 years old, you will only make $433,768.55. Huge difference. Massive amount of difference. So if you start when you're 22, you make $1,670,000. If you start when you're 40, you make $433,000 due to compound interest, investing the same amount, different amounts of time. So this is the biggest reason why you want to start early and start putting away money every month, because the differences in the amount you will have when you retire is massive, and the one defining difference is time. So if you don't have a retirement account, that's why I said this week is the week. I'm telling you, go out and open it and start putting, even if it's $1, start investing, start saving towards your investments. So now I wanted this episode to be a how to do it episode. So we're going to jump in right away with actionable steps. So number one is to decide if you want to open a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. And if you've heard of 401ks, I'm not going to talk about them right now because I am assuming you're an artist, you're running your own business. But if you have a 401k with your employer, you should 100% be maxing that out every single year. And then on top of that, you could even open a Roth IRA. I would talk with a CPA, someone who knows this specifically, to figure out the tax laws of being able to contribute to both a Roth and a 401k, but definitely look into it. It might be advantageous to do that. So just a side note, but today we're going to assume you're just opening a Roth IRA. This is your personal retirement account, no business associated with it. This is for you and your retirement. So I personally like the Roth IRA. The Roth IRA allows you to put in up to $6,000 a year. That's $500 a month. And you can pay tax. You pay taxes on that money up front, but when you take it out, when you're 59 and a half, that's when you can take out the money. You don't have to pay any taxes on it. And that's huge. The tax rate will inevitably go up by the time you're 59 and a half. So I like the idea that you you earn that $6,000 that year, you pay your taxes on it, but you put it away in a Roth IRA, and you never have to pay any taxes on all the interest that accumulates over the years of investing, which, as we talked from compound interest, is huge. The traditional Roth IRA is a little different. You end up not having to pay taxes on that $6,000 that tax year. So if let's say you make a certain amount of money and you have $6,000 left over to invest, you can actually take that $6,000 will not be taxed for that current tax year. However, when you take out the money and it's grown a lot and you've added all this extra interest on and the tax rate is higher, you're going to have to pay taxes on the back end. So I personally like the Roth IRA, but you can weigh in the benefits and pros and cons of getting a tax break on the front end or the back end. That's up to you. Regardless, choose one and just do it. Just do it. Don't even think about it too much. If you're on the fence, just do the Roth IRA. That's the way to go. Next, you need a brokerage account. You need an online bank, essentially, that's going to manage all your investments. And there's plenty of people out there. I personally was with T. Rowe Price for many years, decided I didn't like them. They're kind of old-fashioned and falling behind with all the tech. And I recently switched over to Fidelity, and I love it. It's great. I highly recommend Fidelity for many reasons, which I'll talk about. I also think Vanguard is an incredible company. They're reputable. They've been around forever. So those are the two I'm going to recommend you check out. I've narrowed it down. There's things like Robinhood out there. I'm not a huge fan, but if that's the only way you're going to start investing is Robinhood, then do it. But I think this idea of gamifying investing is dangerous, because investing, when you do it right, should be freaking boring. It should be a habit, and it should be almost automatic, and it shouldn't be something you overthink too much. And this idea that it turns into like a video game is dangerous. So that's my words of warning there. So once you've decided between your brokerage account, remember Fidelity or Vanguard, or a third option if you really, really want to, sign up. It takes 5 seconds. Go on the internet, type in your information, open the account. Remember, open that Roth IRA first, or the traditional IRA first if you have nothing else, and you're good to go. The next thing, step number 3, is to decide on what your investment philosophy will be. And this is where some of the research and some of the learning comes into play. But I'm going to go over 2 basic concepts. First, we have the managed philosophy, where you're actively picking stocks, ETFs, index funds, bonds. We'll talk more about what those are in a second. Or the other option is the simple way, where you just choose one fund that is actively managed for you, and you don't have to worry about anything. You just have this one fund in your Roth IRA, and it will be balanced throughout your life, perfectly managed for you. And I would highly recommend that for someone who's like overwhelmed by all this. Just start there. It's not a big deal. It's actually a great option, and it's way better than not investing at all. So we'll talk about that in a second. So you have to decide between the simple idea or this managed idea. I like the managed idea because I'm very type A and on top of things, and I just like the idea of having more control. But at the same time, I see the value in just having everything simplified into one single investment. And with the simple way, it doesn't mean that you only have one stock. It's actually you buy a mutual fund that is actively managed by Fidelity or by Vanguard, and they will create a perfect asset allocation and diversification of stocks and bonds depending on your age. And their retirement set date accounts. So, mine I think is, I plan to retire around 2055. So you would buy a fund that has a target date of 2055, and they will actively change the stocks and bonds in that fund for you as you get closer to retirement, so that it's safer. So that's a very easy way to go, and highly recommend it for those of you who want a very hands-off approach. The next thing is for the managed folks. So we're going to go to step 4. If you want to do a little more hands-on yourself, then you need to understand a few basic concepts. And one is asset allocation, and the other is diversification. So when we're talking about investing, we want to have a mixture of bonds and stocks. So bonds are essentially a loan to you. So for example, if you have, let's say, $1,000 and you want to give it to a company, they will write you a bond, and you will actually give them $1,000 and they will give you interest on that. Usually the interest is whatever the going interest rate at the time is. Right now we're in a very low interest rate environment, so it's not such a great investment to invest in bonds, but a bond usually has a maturity date. So let's say you invest in like Google and you get a bond from Google and you give them $1,000 and they say, we'll pay you 3% interest every year on this, guaranteed, no matter what, unless the company goes broke, which Google's so big, it's probably a very safe investment. They're probably not likely to default on the loan. And let's say after 5 years, you get your $1,000 back plus the 3% interest that it had over that 5 years. So that's the general idea of a bond. It gets more complicated and dicey, but I just want you to have a general idea of when you hear the word bond, just think of it's like a loan where you're getting paid interest for lending a company money. You can also lend the government money. That's a whole another thing, but same idea. You're lending the government money. They're giving you interest on it. As interest rates go up, it's a better investment because you're getting higher and higher payments each month that are then getting compounded. The other idea is having stocks, which is literally buying a chunk of a company that you like. And as that company grows, you actually grow with it. So the idea of investing in individual companies is this idea you can invest in Google. If you invested in Google back in the 90s, you would have done really well because the company has grown a ton. Companies can also do worse and your investment in that company will drop down. So that is a very simple, basic idea of investing with stocks. Then there's the idea of mutual funds, which is that you're paying a little extra fee and you're having someone else, say, some investment banker like T. Rowe Price or Vanguard or Fidelity, someone at these companies who is going to get a ton of stocks, maybe like 50, 100, or 1,000. And then you're going to buy a little chunk of that basket of stocks and pay them an extra fee to manage it for you. And that's what a mutual fund is. And I'm actually kind of against mutual funds because there's something else that I like way better, which is called index funds, where you actually pay very little or no money to have someone actively manage it. And instead, it's a bunch of stocks, like a basket of stocks that follow a general index. So we could have like the entire US stock market. You have like a random assortment of some of the biggest companies in the United States, and that could be an index fund. A very common one that we hear about every day is the Dow Jones Industrial is an index, the S&P 500 is an index, and those are indexes that you can also buy that, in my opinion, are safer investments because they're so massive and they cover the entire US economy. You can even get total market index funds, which cover the entire world market so that you will just rise and fall with the general markets with the entire world. So those are my favorite investments, are index funds, and I would highly recommend you go in that direction. I'm not going to say whether or not you should invest in those right now today, but I am going to say that index funds are my favorite, and I think they're great because they have very low fees. So diversification is the second thing. We had asset allocation and diversification. With asset allocation, it's all about picking how many stocks you want to have versus how many bonds. And you can do research on how much of a percentage of your portfolio is in stocks and how big a percentage is in bonds. And that's research you need to do personally. It's personal finance for a reason, and the main thing is understanding your own risk. Stocks are inherently more risky, bonds are inherently more safe, but you don't want to go 100% bonds. And you can go 100% stocks, but for your whole life, you don't want to do that. Over time, you want to get some bonds to stabilize your portfolio. So I'm going to tell you some books at the end of this that will help you learn even more. These are wonderful books, and I highly recommend them so you can learn more about that. But these general concepts are important to understand right now as you get ready to invest your first money into your retirement account. So diversification is within your stocks, so no bonds here. We're just talking about stocks. You can buy really big stocks called large cap stocks. You can buy medium-sized companies called mid cap stocks, and then you can buy smaller companies called small cap stocks. And then there's this general accepted idea that anything outside of the US is considered a foreign stock. And foreign stocks are great. They will help you diversify into different markets around the world. So the idea is to have a little bit of large, a little bit of mid, a little bit of small, and a little bit of foreign. And finding that percentage is part of the idea I talked about before of finding your own desired percentages, doing research, maybe talking to some professionals. You can start to get a plan together of how much of each you want. Again, the simple way of just going with one target date fund is that you don't have to worry about any of this. You leave it to the professionals and you just invest in that every month and you're good to go. So again, as this is getting complicated, you're probably like, oh yeah, that simple idea sounds a lot better. Number 5. So now I made it 4, but we're at number 5. So number 5 is to pay attention to fees. There's a lot of things you can't control when investing, but one thing you for sure can control is how much you pay in fees. Like I said before, mutual funds will have a commission every time that you buy stock in the mutual fund. So these fees generally range from anywhere from like 0.015%, which is really low, all the way up to about like 0.3% or 0.2%. These are where you're paying a percentage of the amount that you've invested into the mutual fund. And those can add up. And it's really important to make sure that you don't pay too much in fees. I love Fidelity because they have these Fidelity Zero index funds where literally they have 0 fees. So you invest in the index fund, you pay no fees, and you can invest in the entire stock market or the entire US stock market. And it's a relatively safe way to go and you don't pay any fees. So check into that. It's something I really enjoy, and I think it's an amazing thing that they're doing. Vanguard also, for the last 30 years or more, has been having very low fees as well. So make sure to check into that before you buy a mutual fund or an index fund, because that is one of the main things you can decide between different mutual funds and index funds is the amount of fees that they charge. Next thing we want to do, so let's say that you've decided you're going to be in do more research on your own, read books, and become a managed investor. Or if you're going to go the simple route and become a simple investor, you're just going to buy that one target date fund, put it in your Roth IRA, forget about it, and let the money just start rolling in. So decide what you want to be, and you can always change that later, or you can do a little bit of a mix, but it's important to kind of make a decision there. So once you've done that, number 6 is to set up link your bank account with your brokerage account. So you want to make it really easy to transfer money from a savings account or a checking account in your current bank into your brokerage account with Fidelity or Vanguard or whoever you choose. So make sure you do that. It's very important. That way, every month you can just transfer money over. So every month, now that you've decided how you're going to invest, you've done some research on your own, you need to pick your first investment and you need to transfer some money. So every month I recommend transferring 15% of your total income first before you pay any bills, any taxes, anything. This money you pay yourself first. This is a huge important concept. Some people will be like, oh my God, Wilson, how would I have the amount of the money to do that? It's not easy, but you have to do it. It's the most important concept of building wealth in your life. Every wealthy artist has to do this. You must pay yourself first. And it was hard for me to understand this, but now I get it. So before you even do anything else, the very first of the month, transfer 15% of your income to your retirement account. And if you can't do 15%, do 1%. Whatever you can do, just do it. Don't do 0%. That's the most important thing. And as you get more and more money, maybe that 15% will become more realistic, and maybe eventually you'll start investing 50% of your income. Who knows? That would be incredible, and that's what I want for you. But the habit of doing it every month right now is so, so important for the future of your growth as a wealthy artist. So next, you have to this is number 8, step 8. This is the last step. Once you transfer that money into your brokerage account, into your Roth IRA, you must invest that money. You can't just let it sit there. Otherwise, it's just sitting in a regular old bank account, not beating inflation. It's actually just losing money, right? So I highly recommend this idea of dollar cost averaging, where let's say it's $500 a month, you immediately invest that into your index fund of choice. So let's say that you have an index fund with the S&P 500 to start out with, which is a great safe investment. I would highly recommend that. Don't do it unless you do some research, but this is a great way to go. So let's say you do that. You put the $500 in, you invest in like VOO, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, and you just put it in every month. No matter what, if the stock is up, if the stock is down, you just keep doing it. Trying to time the market is kind of a fool's errand. You can try and do it, but I highly recommend you just invest that money a little bit each month. As you get more and more money, you might buy another index fund to try to get a little bit more diversified. Maybe you get a foreign stock index fund that has a basket of stocks that are outside of the US, and you start to hit some percentages. Like I said, you'll read more about these in these books that I recommend of exactly how to do that and what percentages you should shoot for. Now, if you're in the simple mode, you just take that $500 and you invest it directly into that target date fund on whenever you're supposed to retire. You can do research by typing target date funds in Google, Fidelity, Vanguard, target date funds, and they'll come up with their funds. So super simple. Remember, don't overcomplicate this. So that is my 8-step plan to setting up your retirement account. I know that was kind of a lot of information. I know it came fast, but again, this is a journey. But even in this first week, if you open up that brokerage account and start putting money in, you are on the right track. And if you start investing, you are even further on that track. So please do that. Don't be afraid. You just got to start. You won't necessarily lose a ton of money if you keep that money in those accounts and do this broad range index investing. By the time you retire, you will have made money. There's just no way. The market will generally go up over time. In the short term, you may lose money, but don't even worry about that. You're not going to pull this money out until you're at least 59 and a half. So keep that in mind. Lastly, I highly recommend reading some books, and I'm going to give you these books in the order that I recommend. So the first book, I really love this book. It's really basic, and John C. Bogle is the author. He's the one who created Vanguard, and his story is really interesting. You should read about him. Really great guy. I really like his philosophies. It's called The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John C. Bogle. That's The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John C. Bogle. It's a quick read, and it will give you an idea of an alternative philosophy to investing that I think is really sound. And it goes kind of against all the cryptocurrency mania and all this stuff on Reddit that we've been hearing lately, but you don't really want to be like that. It's not a wealthy artist way. The next book that I would recommend, I actually have it right here, is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. This book has a pretty aggressive tone. Some people are put off by Ramit's tone, but his information is rock solid. He has a whole section on investing in here, plus a ton of other great information on credit cards, getting out of debt, managing checking accounts, all that good personal finance stuff, and it's written in terms of millennials. So I highly recommend that book, Ramit Sethi, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. This book was awesome. And then if you want to go even further, this book was written in the 80s. This one I read and I really liked it. It's by a famous investor named Peter Lynch. It's called One Up on Wall Street, How to Use What You Already Know to Make Money in the Market. And this is if you're trying to be a more active investor. Like I said, the managed investor, you're actively buying individual stocks. If you're interested in that, this is a great read on how to actually research and be smart when you're buying individual stocks and not just doing something you saw on TV or read on the internet. Don't ever do that. Lastly, if you want to go even deeper and you're really hardcore and you want to really learn more, I highly recommend The Intelligent Investor. This book I've been reading on and off for over a decade now. It's by Benjamin Graham, who's the godfather of value investing back in the 20s and 30s, back when the stock market used to be considered something that was considered like gambling. He changed all that. This guy is rock solid. He's Warren Buffett's mentor. So you're going even beyond Warren Buffett to the guy that influenced him. And Warren Buffett is, he follows this guy's stuff to a T, and Warren Buffett's one of the greatest investors of all time. So I highly recommend you learn from the greats. Don't fall for all the crazy fads with like cryptocurrency and stuff. If you're going to do crypto, do a shit ton of research, but don't get swept up on the quick money trends. Have a rock solid plan. Wealthy people don't get stuck up in this like crazy trend where you're doing high risk, high reward stuff all the time. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it wasn't too dry and boring, but I love this stuff. If you have any comments, if you want to correct me on anything I said, I'm always open to learning. But I hope this was helpful. And Wealthy Artists, I will see you next week with Sarah. Thank you so much for listening and watching on YouTube if you're on YouTube. I will say, if you can give us 5 stars, that's incredible on iTunes. Please tell your friends about us. This is how this podcast is growing. We want to create a community that fosters wealth in the creative artist community and breaks all this crap about starving artist mentality and the music industry is against us, all this sort of blame. We want to break all that and empower ourselves to become wealthy and give you tools and ways to do that. So that is what we're all about. If you're about that, spread the word, spread the vibe, spread the energy, and I will see you all later. All right.